Welcome to Madison Public Library in Madison, Ohio's Theater of the Mind, Halloween edition. Tonight we begin a two-night story, The Room in the Tower by E.F. Benson. To hear more stories, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is probable that everybody who is at all a constant dreamer has had at least one experience of an event or a sequence of circumstances which have come to his mind in sleep, being subsequently realized in the material world. But, in my opinion, so far from this being a strange thing, it would be far odder if this fulfillment did not occasionally happen, since our dreams are, as a rule, concerned with people whom we know and places with which we are familiar, such as might very naturally occur in the awake and daylit world. True, these dreams are often broken into by some absurd and fantastic incident, which puts them out of court in regard to their subsequent fulfillment, but on the mere calculation of chances, it does not appear in the least unlikely that a dream imagined by anyone who dreams constantly should occasionally come true. Not long ago, for instance, I experienced such a fulfillment of a dream, which seems to me in no way remarkable and to have no way a psychical significance. The manner of it was as follows. A certain friend of mine living abroad is amiable enough to write to me about once in a fortnight. Thus, when 14 days or thereabouts have elapsed since I last heard from him, in my mind, probably, either unconsciously or subconsciously, is expectant of a letter from him. One night last week I dreamed that as I was going upstairs to dress for dinner, I heard, as I often heard, the sound of the postman's knock on my front door, and diverted my direction downstairs instead. There, among other correspondence, was a letter from him. Thereafter the fantastic entered, for on opening it I found inside the ace of diamonds, and scribbled across it in his well-known handwriting, I am sending you this for safe custody, as you know it is running an unreasonable risk to keep aces in Italy. The next evening, I was just preparing to go upstairs to dress when I heard the postman's knock, and did precisely as I had done in my dream. There, among other letters, was one from my friend. Only it did not contain the ace of diamonds. Had it done so, I should have attached more weight to the matter, which, as it stands, seems to me a perfectly ordinary coincidence. No doubt I consciously or subconsciously expected a letter from him, and this suggested to me my dream. Similarly, the fact that my friend had not written to me for a fortnight suggested to him that he should do so. But occasionally it is not so easy to find such an explanation, and for the following story I can find no explanation at all. It came out of the dark, and into the dark it has gone again. All my life I have been a habitual dreamer. The nights are few, that is to say, when I do not find on waking in the morning that some mental experience has been mine, and sometimes, all night long apparently, a series of most dazzling adventures befall me. Almost without exception, these adventures are pleasant, though often merely trivial. It is an exception that I am going to speak. It is when I was about 16 that a certain dream first came to me, and this is how it befell. It opened with my being set down at the door of a big red brick house where I understood I was going to stay. The servant who opened the door told me that tea was being served in the garden, and led me through a low, dark-paneled hall with a large open fireplace on a cheerful green lawn set around with flower beds. There were grouped about the tea table a small party of people, but they were all strangers to me except one, who was a schoolfellow called Jack Stone, clearly the son of the house, and he introduced me to his mother and father and a couple of sisters. I was, I remember, somewhat astonished to find myself here, for the boy in question was scarcely known to me, and I rather disliked what I knew of him. Moreover, he had left school nearly a year before. The afternoon was very hot, and an intolerable oppression reigned. On the far side of the lawn ran a red brick wall, with an iron gate in its center, outside which stood a walnut tree. We sat in the shadow of the house opposite a row of long windows, inside which I could see a table with cloth laid, glimmering with glass and silver. This garden front of the house was very long, and at one end of it stood a tower of 3 stories, which looked to me much older than the rest of the building. Before long, Mrs. Stone, who like the rest of the party sat in absolute silence, said to me, "Jack will show you your room. I have given you the room in the tower." Quite inexplicably, my heart sank at her words. I felt as if I had known that I should have the room in the tower, and that it contained something dreadful and significant. Jack instantly got up, and I understood that I had to follow him. In silence we passed through the hall and mounted a great oak staircase with many corners, and arrived at a small landing with 2 doors set in it. He pushed one of these open for me to enter, and without coming in himself closed it after me. Then I knew that my conjecture had been right. There was something awful in the room, and with the terror of nightmare growing swiftly and enveloping me, I awoke in a spasm of terror. Now, the dream, or variations of it, occurred to me intermittently for 15 years. Most often it came in exactly this form: the arrival, the tea laid out on the lawn, the deadly silence, succeeded by one deadly sentence, the mounting with Jack Stone up to the room in the tower where horror dwelt. And it always came to a close in the nightmare of terror at that which was in the room, though I never saw what it was. At other times, I experienced variations on this same theme. Occasionally, for instance, we would be sitting at dinner in the dining room, into the windows of which I had looked on the first night when the dream of this house visited me. But wherever we were, there was the same silence, the same sense of dreadful oppression and foreboding. And the silence, I knew, would always be broken by Mrs. Stone saying to me, "Jack will show you your room. I have given you the room in the tower." Upon which, this was invariable, I had to follow him up the oak staircase with many corners and enter the place that I dreaded more and more each time that I visited it in sleep. Or again, I would find myself playing cards, still in silence, in a drawing room lit with immense chandeliers that gave a blinding illumination. What the game I was, I have no idea. What I remember with a sense of miserable anticipation was that soon Mrs. Stone would get up and say to me, "Jack will show you your room. I have given you the room in the tower." This drawing room where we played cards was next to the dining room, and as I have said, was always brilliantly illuminated, whereas the rest of the house was full of dusk and shadows. And yet, how often, in spite of these bouquets of lights, have I not pored over the cards that were dealt me, scarcely able, for some reason, to see them? Their designs, too, were strange. There were no red suits, but all were black, and among them were certain cards that were black all over. I hated and dreaded those. As this dream continued to recur, I got to know the greater part of the house. There was a smoking room beyond the drawing room, at the end of the passage with a green baize door. It was always very dark there, and as often as I went there, I passed somebody whom I could not see in the doorway coming out. Curious developments, too, took place in the characters that peopled the dream, as might happen to living persons. Mrs. Stone, for instance, who when I first saw her had been black-haired, became gray, and instead of rising briskly, as she had done at first when she said, "Jack will show you your room. I have given you the room in the tower," got up feebly, as if the strength was leaving her limbs. Jack also grew up, and became a rather ill-looking young man, with a brown mustache, while one of the sisters ceased to appear, and I understood she was married. Then it so happened that I was not visited by this dream for 6 months or more, and I began to hope, and such inexplicable dread did I hold it, that it had passed away for good. But one night, after this interval, I again found myself being shown out onto the lawn for tea, and Mrs. Stone was not there, while the others were all dressed in black. At once I guessed the reason, and my heart leaped at the thought that perhaps this time I should not have to sleep in the room in the tower. And though we usually all sat in silence, on this occasion the sense of relief made me talk and laugh as I had never yet done. But even then matters were not altogether comfortable, for no one else spoke, and they all looked secretly at each other. And soon the foolish stream of my talk ran dry, and gradually an apprehension worse than anything I had ever previously known gained on me as the light slowly faded. Suddenly a voice, which I knew well, broke the silence, the voice of Mrs. Stone, saying, "Jack will show you your room. I have given you the room in the tower." It seemed to come from near the gate in the red brick wall that bounded the lawn, and looking up, I saw that the grass outside was sown thick with gravestones. A curious grayish light shone from them, and I could read the lettering on the grave nearest me, and it said, "In evil memory of Julia Stone." And as usual, Jack got up, and again I followed him through the hall and up the staircase with many corners. On this occasion it was darker than usual, and when I passed into the room in the tower, I could only just see the furniture, the position of which was already familiar to me. So there was a dreadful odor of decay in the room, and I awoke screaming. The dream, with such variations and developments as I have mentioned, went on at intervals for 15 years. Sometimes I would dream it 2 or 3 nights in succession. Once, as I have said, there was an intermission of 6 months, but taking a reasonable average, I should say that I dreamed it quite as often as once in a month. It had, as is plain, something of nightmare about it, since it always ended in the same appalling terror, which so far from getting less, seemed to me to gather fresh fear every time that I experienced it. There was, too, a strange and dreadful consistency about it. The characters in it, as I have mentioned, got regularly older. Death and marriage visited this silent family, and I never in the dream, after Mrs. Stone had died, set eyes on her again. But it was always her voice that told me that the room in the tower was prepared for me, and whether we had tea out on the lawn or the scene was laid in one of the rooms overlooking it, I could always see her gravestone standing just outside the iron gate. It was the same, too, with the married daughter. Usually she was not present, but once or twice she returned again in company with the man whom I took to be her husband. He, too, like the rest of them, was always silent, but owing to the constant repetition of the dream, I had ceased to attach in my waking hours any significance to it. I never met Jack Stone again during all those years, nor did I ever see a house that resembled this dark house of my dream. And then something happened. I had been in London in this year up till the end of July, and during the first week in August went down to stay with a friend in a house he had taken for the summer months in the Ashdown Forest district of Sussex. I left London early, for John Clinton was to meet me at Forest Row Station, and we were going to spend the day golfing and go to his house in the evening. He had his motor with him, and we set off about 5 in the afternoon, after a thoroughly delightful day, for the drive, the distance being some 10 miles. As it was still so early, we did not have tea at the clubhouse, but waited till we could get home. As we drove, the weather, which up till then had been, though hot, deliciously fresh, seemed to me to alter in quality and become very stagnant and oppressive, and I felt that indefinable sense of ominous apprehension that I am accustomed to before thunder. John, however, did not share my views, attributing my loss of lightness to the fact that I had lost both my matches. Events proved, however, that I was right, though I do not think that the thunderstorm that broke that night was the sole cause of my depression. Our way lay through deep, high-banked lanes, and before we had gone very far I fell asleep, and was only awakened by the stopping of the motor. and with a sudden thrill, partly of fear, but chiefly of curiosity, I found myself standing in the doorway of my house of dream. We went, I half wondered whether or not I was dreaming still, through a low oak paneled hall and out onto the lawn where tea was laid in the shadow of the house. It was set in flower beds, a red brick wall with a space of rough grass with a walnut tree. The facade of the house was very long, and at one end stood a 3-storied tower, markedly older than the rest. Here, for the moment, all resemblance to the repeated dreams ceased. There was no silence and somehow terrible family, but a large assembly of exceedingly cheerful persons, all of whom were known to me. And in spite of the horror with which the dream itself had always filled me, I felt nothing of it now that the scene of it was thus reproduced before me. But I felt intensest curiosity as to what was going to happen. Tea pursued its cheerful course, and before long Mrs. Clinton got up. And at that moment I think I knew what she was going to say. She spoke to me, and what she said was, "Jack will show you your room. I have given you the room in the tower." And here we stop for this evening. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for part 2. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest.